Rewritten! When he opened his eyes, he felt several things happening to him all at once. He hadn't physically moved an inch, but his mind had traveled into a completely new space. He could see two different things at the same time, occupying two different spaces, two different bodies. He had only felt like this once before, and it was whenever his gem had been gruesomely ripped from his belly. His consciousness split as this gem took life and tried to return to him. But this time, he wasn't severed in two. He was simply stretched over into another mind, doubling himself rather than having it. He looked down, seeing the two bodies that he was in. One was Stephen, wearing his normal star-printed clothes and pink varsity jacket, no changes at all. The other was White Diamond. He could see her glittering white armored robes, now tinged pink, with the sparkling stars and silver trims winking up at him in the light. He was tall, so massively tall, enough to touch the top of a skyscraper. And most of all, he felt powerful, far more than he had before. The raw energy was surging through him, pulsing like a heartbeat, all of it starting at the heavy gem embedded into his forehead. He could see Stephen, himself, on the teal-colored table in front of him, meeting his own gaze, looking up at the pink-hued White Diamond at the same time. It made Rat's claws skitter up and down his back to see himself. He looked so pale and sweaty, with dark shadows casting underneath his eyes, strands of his curly hair sticking out in disarray. He looked kind of like a mess. This is so weird. Stephen shook both of his heads, staring down at his pairs of hands, both of the bodies that he was controlling mirroring each other perfectly. I'm a diamond. At first, he had felt secure with the extra surge of power from being inside of White's mind. But now it began to terrify him, feeling fear spiraling off of every atom of her skin, rejecting the energy that was pounding through it, wanting it to go away. No, he yelped. This is the last thing I needed to see! His voice was echoing, doubled through White's mouth. I don't want to be you! I don't want to be anything like you! He was disgusted by the ebony talons, the glimmering white skin, the radiance of her size. His gems were humming with light, a warmth that he was afraid of, that he hated more than anything. Fury shielded the terror, biting back with a sharp cry of, Why won't you just go away? White's gigantic fist slammed down onto the table, barely missing Stephen, making the table jump and then crumble. The cracks that he'd caused before were now broken too far to sustain her hit, and the table gave way like a house of cards. Alarm shot through him as the Stephen half plummeted, flailing and making White half fall too. Luckily, Spinel managed to spring underneath both him and Volleyball, using her stretchy limbs to cushion the fall for them. The diamond staggered backwards, gasping in shock, trying to reach forward to help. Don't hurt me! He shrieked, panic pounding through his ears as he clutched his gem, fearing it being taken away from him again. White Diamond was dangerous, she was deadly, she had torn his gem out, she had tried to kill him. Stephen was staring up at White, who was wearing the same exact expression. She didn't reach down with her horrible black nails, she didn't touch him at all. She was doing the same movements that he was, curling up in terror. She can't hurt me, he realized. I'm controlling her. That didn't matter. He still couldn't stand her platinum eyes, her gleaming figure, her menacingly glossy dark talons, her radiating energy. So, why am I so afraid? He hated all of this. He hated his diamond half. He hated White. He hated every drop of power that they both held against him. But he didn't have to be afraid right now. She was his puppet. That meant that he could do something about the hatred. Maybe she'd finally understand what it was like. It was like a light bulb died in his head. A darkness gathered strength around him, whispering, She's the one that should be afraid. His voices were sinister, wiped of every emotion except pure, revolted loathing. He knew what he had to do. So Stephen began to stand up, slowly and dangerously, every inch of his body's rippling of tension. He glared at himself, the world fading out into black, nothing mattering to him more than White. It was like he was dreaming. He felt himself moving without really realizing that he was doing anything at all. His mind was latched onto one focused point, blanking out everything else. What's going on? His voices echoed. A part of him was scared, another part was vengeful. He didn't respond to the scared half. He only began to raise his hands, both of the bodies mirroring his actions in perfect coordination. Stop it! I don't like this! He pleaded, knowing what he was about to do. Too bad, he replied, his voice robotic and dark, full of nothing. Stephen curled his hands into fists, pushing them to clamp together. The fingers wound tightly within one another, firm and stiff like a mallet. Let me go, he squeaked. Please, you're scaring me. His heart pounded with venom that dripped and ate away at him eagerly, egging him on, feeding hungrily off of the fear that was bleeding from her. This is for everything you put me through, Stephen hissed, watching his own face contort into a distorted snarl, unrecognizable and mortifying. So he drew his head back, the too perfect white gem on his forehead shimmering and defenseless, his fists ready to end it. End the power. Stephen threw his fists up towards his face, smashing into the beautiful gem that was perched on his forehead. An eternal, agonized scream erupted from his mouth as pain surged through his whole body like a billion volts of lightning. And just like that, as if a cord was cut, he was back in his own body, the spell broken as the world snapped back to him. He was on the floor, on his back, pain blossoming in his forehead where he had hit himself. He was just Stephen again. What did he just do? There were shouts of surprise from the other gems, gasping and staring all towards where White was standing. The massive, powerful monarch was staring into nothing, her face twisted in agony, every limb rigid and twitching. The gem on her forehead was cracked deeply, nearly in half, its power flickering as her form began to destabilize. And then White Diamond poofed, for the very first time. It was an explosion of pale smoke, the glittering particles filling up the whole room. The entire palace shook to its roots from the rebound. Her cracked gem stayed quivering in the air for only a moment before it plummeted downwards, falling and falling and falling, slamming into the rubble-strewn floor with an impact that made Stephen's whole body jump up a foot or two. Horror filled everyone like a flooding, icy cave as they stared at her, speechless and frozen in place. White Diamond's fractured gem stayed silent and still, on the floor, fizzing and sparking with its leaking light.